Feedback can be as the process of communicating information about performance or behavior that leads to an action for improvement. Leads to an action for improvement is the key over here. Communication is a two-way exchange of thoughts. Feedback is an integral part of this process. For communication to be effective, you have to be aware of the impact of your words and actions to others. In personal as well as professional life, interpersonal skills are critical in developing healthy relationships. The ability to provide effective feedback is an important aspect of interpersonal skills. The strength differentiates the successful manager from others, managers who provide constructive feedback. Now, constructive feedback is pretty important because it helps in successfully motivating and developing their staff, right? Other struggles in the people management. Coach and advise their subordinates to blossom if you are following the constructive feedback. Otherwise, not only drift themselves but lead their subordinates nowhere. It could also mentor people to realize their potential. That's what a constructive feedback could do. Now, the feedbacks could be like, a constructive feedback or a destructive feedback. Let's understand this in a little more detail. Feedback can either be positive, reinforcing good performance and behavior, or negative, correcting and improving poor performance and behavior. The purpose of both is to motivate the individual to perform better, improve him or herself and the organization. So both the positive and negative types of feedback must be constructive. So it's not like all positive feedbacks are constructive and negative is destructive kind of feedbacks. Both positive and negative types of feedbacks must be constructive. If not, there are two major problems. There is no recognition of good performance, number one. Number two, negative feedback will become destructive criticism. In both cases, employee will lose his motivation and commitment. Destructive feedback, on the other hand, is vague and does not indicate any areas of improvement. For example, telling someone, "I don't like your attitude," is a destructive criticism. Never ever start your feedback negatively, commenting upon person's attitude or behavior. This would put him on a defensive and the discussion would be at dead end. Gently start with the areas where he or she has fallen short. Lead the discussion to indicate the behavioral pattern that caused the underperformance. Now, when does this destructive criticism occur? So when good performance is never appreciated and feedback is given only when things go wrong, this leads to destructive criticism. When there is no dialogue about the performance, when there are no agreed standards of measuring performance or behavior, or when there are no set plans of employee development, destructive criticism comes out. So what's the purpose of a feedback? Providing information about behavior and performance against standards in such a way that recipient maintain a positive attitude towards themselves and their work. Encourage recipients to commit themselves to the personal plan to move towards agreed standards of behavior and performance. Now, when do you think we should give feedback? Strike while the iron is hot is what I would say. Time you give feedback close to the occurrence of the events you are reviewing. If a feedback is given much later of what has actually happened, it is very difficult for the recipients to think over it and take action towards that. So take into account your ability to deliver a constructive feedback. Not everyone in the very first go can work towards that. It's a skill that you need to slowly build on, how well you can give a constructive feedback. Take into account the recipient's ability to handle the feedback. Not everybody can handle the feedback in the same way. Some people need it to be given in a very slow, some people can be upfront. You need to understand who is the recipient to whom you are giving a feedback. Where to give a feedback? The way of giving feedback is perhaps obvious. In the workplace, it is generally best to seek a quiet room where you will not be overheaded or interrupted. Avoid giving feedbacks any place, anywhere. It doesn't really gets in them. So when there is a feedback, it's a serious thing. When you sit and you have spent enough time, you explain them what is it that they can do and how they can improve it. Now I'm going to give you 10 tools of how to give a constructive feedbacks. These tools will help you when you practice them. Your capacity or your way of giving a constructive feedbacks improves day on day. The 10 tools. Number 1 is analyze the current situation. Be very clear about the specific aspects of the present behavior or performance that needs change and why. Have examples ready. You should be able to clearly describe the event and the after effects. Tool number 2. Decide on your outcomes and objectives. The first step is that you yourself are very clear what you want the feedback to achieve. Then construct the strategy to achieve the desired outcome. Your objective should be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Tool 3, calibrate for receptiveness. Different people have different tolerance levels. This capacity is not static and may change due to background factors. Not everyone can take the same level. You must be aware of what their capacity of receptiveness is. Pay close attention to the reaction, observe them, and listen actively to their responses. Accordingly, adjust the pace and content of your feedback. Tool number 4, create the right environment. You should create a supportive climate to trust and mutual respect and openness for giving and receiving feedback. This is determined by how well you know the person and what baggage from previous encounters, good and bad, both of you bring the feedback sessions. Tool 5 is communicate effectively. Use your communication skills properly. Use the appropriate words, use the appropriate tone. Use your body language properly. For example, the statement your presentation generally was not good. When you say someone, your presentation was generally not good. However, you need to give more time for questions can come across as a supportive suggestions for change. If delivered in anger or sarcastic tone, it would consider as a destructive criticism. Tool number 6, describe the behavior you wish to change. This is a critical stage. It is essential first that the recipients of the feedback understand what the issue is. Many a times we just miss there. Secondly, that he or she accepts there is a problem. And thirdly, that he or she accepts there is a need to change. Until they feel that the need is there, then the feedback doesn't really work. It just hits a wall and gets back. Tool number 7, describe the behavior you want. It is important to make clear that behavior or performance you want from them in the future. That is, say I want you to return customer call within 24 hours, for example. Often performance is poor because people are not clear about the standard of performance expected from them. Many a times it happens in our workplace, right? We really don't know what is expected out of our job. We assume maybe this is exactly what needs to be done. Until it is very clear that this is what expected, feedback doesn't work. So tool 7 says describe the behavior you want. The 8th tool talks about seek solutions together. The recipient may want to make the required changes but may not be equipped to do this by himself or herself. Offer suggestions. Encourage the individuals to find solutions by asking questions like, what could you do differently? What is stopping you from doing the job? People may need various forms of help, coaching, training, interaction with a third party. You must be prepared to give that help. If you are unable to offer this help, explain to him why you are not able to do that and how well it can be pitched in. Tool number 9, focus on what is good. Most of the times we only listen things which are not working good, but then that's not how it needs to be. Should also focus on what is good. Be sure to focus on good as well as the not so good areas. Some people suggest the use of the word like good, bad, and then good sandwich, right? So you give a good feedback, then something which is not so nice but you want to improve, and then maybe you close it back with a good one, right? Say for example, a good manager opens the mind of a learner through positive feedbacks. He then conveys the bad message, that is the areas where you require improvement. The session is closed with a final good message. The learner goes back feeling positive about the entire feedback session. That's how the tool number 9 needs to be worked on. Tool 10 talks about getting agreement. You can't force someone to change his or her behavior or performance. You can help and encourage, but the change has to come from within. Therefore, it is vital that the individual agrees on. Not just that I say something and then people change. Until they understand yes, this is what something I need to do, and they agree upon it, it doesn't work. Measurable objective standards for the job or areas of behavior under discussion, right? The existence of gap between the current and the desired level of performance, the extent the gap and the fact that he or she must own the gap. Actions to close the gap, the time span for achieving the change. If the time span is long, the dates for reviewing the progress is all needs to be there. There has to be an agreement between the one who gives feedback and the recipients. Few other things to keep in mind. Be clear when you advance about like what you want to say, when it would be most appropriate to say it, why you are saying it, where you are going to say it. You got to be very clear about these things. Start with the positive always, right? Constructive feedback can enhance self-esteem, and with a positive self-esteem, the individual will be more likely to feel comfortable at making personal changes. Negative feedback hurts self-esteem. Individuals with a less positive self-esteem lack confidence to evaluate themselves objectively. They will become more resistant to growth and change. Positive self-concept is therefore important for the individual to be more open to learning opportunities. If the feedback commences on a positive note, the receiver's ego is not impacted and he will be ready to accept negative feedback as a genuine advice of his improvement. It's pretty important to understand how ego works over here. Select priorities. It is not always appropriate to share every possible piece of feedback with the receiver. It is appropriate to decide which how much feedback the receivers can take so that the experience is helpful and useful to him or her. It is also appropriate to select priority areas, the appropriate number of most important useful points, and express these genuinely, positively and sensitively. See, when somebody gets a lot of things to work on, they just mix up everything and they might not work on anything. But if someone understands very clearly, these are 1, 2, 3 things that I need to work on, that I need to improvise on, things work much better. The next piece of advice is be specific. If the feedback is going to be helpful, then it is likely that the feedback needs to be linked with a concrete example or a specific situation or event. Just saying that was great or it was dreadful does not help the recipients in any way. Explain the details and your logic of reaching such conclusions and evaluations. You need to say why do you think you felt that was a great work or that was a very bad work, right? They need to understand the why over there. Refer to practices or processes which can be changed. Feedback is likely to be the maximum use if the provider uses it as a means to improve performance of the recipients. So the provider has to relate the review to some specific aspect of their performance over which they have some level of control. There could be a draw out and an offer alternatives, like for example, this is particularly important when you are offering negative feedback. You got to be very careful when you offer when you are giving a negative feedback, right? To ensure that such feedback is constructive, it is essentially appropriate to offer, discuss or draw out alternative strategies. In this way, the feedback is less likely to be perceived as merely criticism, and you have made efforts to combine negative feedback with positive suggestions or alternatives. The recipient also will feel that the ideas are not thrust on him or her, but he's the one having the authority to choose the alternative that suits him. See, end of the day, you can only give a feedback, right? They receive it and they're the only one who can work on it. They need to work by themselves. Own the feedback. You can only speak on behalf of your review team. Hence, any feedback you give to another can only be from your review team experience, perception and beliefs and values. The thought process of other people may be different from yours. So give feedback in such a way that the recipients clearly understands that the feedback is based only on your team observation or your individual observation, depends on what you are giving, right? And your own individual interpretations and your own conclusions. And those are key things that you need to keep in mind to give a constructive feedbacks.